Welcome to In Good Company. Today we have the pleasure of talking with Dr. Edward Angel, who currently is a Professor Emeritus of Computer Science at the University of New Mexico. He's also founding director of the Art, Research, Technology, and Science Laboratory at UNM, and also their first presidential teaching fellow. He has held visiting positions at such institutions as the Lund Institute of Technology in Sweden, the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, India, University College London, Imperial College London. And his main research interests are computer graphics and scientific visualization. Ed has taught over 100 professional short courses and has two books of interest to our listeners. One is Interactive Computer Graphics, most recently co-authored with Dave Schreiner, and OpenGL Primer, which, by the way, I've used in my classes. In 2019, he received the Exemplary Service Award from UNM School of Engineering Leadership Board. And in 2022, this year, he was the recipient of the ACM SIGGRAPH Distinguished Educator Award. Ed, welcome to In Good Company.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ed, it's one thing I want to ask you, and this is something which I ask a lot of people in our field. I mean, we both are retired professors of computer graphics. How did you get started teaching computer graphics?
Oh, that's actually it's kind of an interesting story. I mean, when I first was at UNM, I was in just electrical and computer engineering, and I was running the computer engineering program. And my friend Cleve Moeller was running. We brought him in from math to be head of the computer science department, and we used to work together a lot. And we had a very distinguished graphics person coming down from Los Alamos once a week, and he could only do it on Monday mornings from 9 to noon. And then he'd go off teaching short courses. And that was a disaster for our students because our courses were generally Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I went to Cleve and I said, this is terrible. We can't keep doing this. I could do better than that. And he said, go ahead. And so I wound up with no background in graphics. I had been doing image processing for quite a while, teaching computer graphics, and one thing led to another. And I was kind of liking teaching computer graphics. I was always teaching other stuff because that's what I knew. I didn't know computer graphics, at least then. And so that's how I got started.
Interesting. Now, I just want to let you know that one of the things that happened to me early on in my career teaching graphics was our department was being introduced to somebody else, and they said so-and-so deals with databases, so-and-so deals with artificial intelligence. Bill, he makes pretty pictures. Literally, that's what we said. Did you ever have any kind of reaction from people like, you know, there are better things to do than computer graphics? I'm just curious.
I don't know if it's any better now or worse now than it was then. I think maybe in my case it was acceptable because I had, the standard academic thing of publishing papers in the standard, especially the systems and control journals and things like that. So I never got that because it was just sort of helping the department by teaching it. I think it became more difficult when we started the arts lab, because that had a mission of economic development and working with the state and doing all kinds of other things. And at that time, we were heavily into animation courses in the film industry. And then I started getting a lot of negative feedback from some of my ancient colleagues.
As in, what does this have to really do with computer graphics?
Yeah, or this is the economic development part was hard because a lot of the traditional academics, they saw that none of that counts because it's not coming from NSF, that kind of thing. But with the younger people, it was fine.
Yeah, I think NSF has caught up since then.
Yeah. And I got involved with parts of NSF that were doing partnerships for innovation grants. And there, the impetus was not to do that. It was to bring what had been done under NSF in theory and other things, bring that into economic development in the community. So that sort of gave me some space in computer science.
Yeah. Well, Ed, I've known you for quite a few years, and one of the things you've always been known for, I mean, you've published, you talked about it, done courses, is OpenGL. How did you get into OpenGL? I mean, Where did
Oh,
that
that
come?
was, yeah, that was, so this is part of not knowing anything when I started. And so when I started, it was around 1982. And I think the only book I really had was Newman and Sproul. And then right after that, Foley and Van Dam came out. And Foley and Van Dam had some software in it, but we didn't really have machines it could run on. And I didn't want to develop software on my own. And so I tried various things for years. I taught a GKS version of my course because I thought that might be the standard. And then we got some early Sun terminals, and I was running Sun Core on that. And that had lots of problems. But then when OpenGL, I know what happened. What I got is I wound up getting an SGI. That was a long story where we traded an old VAX for an SGI when all the companies went bankrupt, and that worked out real well. But that wasn't really good for teaching large. You just have a lot of students taking our classes, and then when but because of GL on the SGI. I remember one of my students who I had working out at Sandia, he came and said, there's this GL is way better for doing graphics than the stuff we were doing, all kinds of different ones. And so I wound up trying GL, and then OpenGL came along, and I said, this is wonderful, because it all came from, I don't want to develop my own software. I want stuff that students can use anywhere. And I just happened to get into that early. And wrote a book to try and explain it to myself and my students, and things took off from there.
Excellent. How do you feel about the what is it? Vulkan is the new. They're touting it as the new replacement for OpenGL.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Dave and I, especially, when we got into WebGL, we found out WebGL solved an awful lot of problems. With OpenGL, it was especially when we had a book that was being used everywhere. The beginning of every semester was just a disaster, because I'd have people on the phone, people in email, people sending me, how do I get this combination working? How do I get it under this version of Linux? And what about these libraries and those libraries? So it was horrendous. But then when WebGL came along, it solved all of those problems. It just worked everywhere. It had the advantage of working on mobile devices and things. So that became just one. So then when Vulkan and others started being developed, Metal and various versions of Direct 3D, we looked at that. Dave and I just gave a talk at SIGGRAPH that was virtual, and I think nobody saw it, about what was coming down. And I've gone to various meetings about Vulkan and others, and the problem is it's not right for teaching. That's really what happens when you have something where your hello world in the language could take 1,000 lines. That's not what you really want for teaching.
No.
And so Dave and I have made a case that things may be changing in the future. Because there's other options like that are more. What's the word I'm looking for? Where you can, just look at a camera model and then, program at a much higher level. There used to be things, no. So we liked where we are with WebGL because you don't have to get into the details of the hardware initially. You can get people started. That was the whole thing when we started with OpenGL, to do a top-down approach where students could be writing three-dimensional programs very early. And we still believe in that. But on the other hand, let me back up and say, I think what happens in the graphics world, and this is what OpenGL and the others, is we went from early in the game where what happened in graphics was being driven by the scientific community and the engineering community and the CAD community. And then it was being driven because of computer games. It was being driven by what was available in the game world. In the game world, there was this huge premium on being able to do this really high-powered stuff and have all these wonderful innovations in hardware and supporting them. And so things like the architectures we wound up dealing with, UI or other educators, really came not out of the old scientific world, but were coming out of the game world. And we live with that. And I think what's happening now with things like Vulkan is, again, it's being driven by people who want to do these high-level interactive kinds of things, for example, in games, and they don't fit with what I think we need to do for a first computer graphics course for scientists, engineers, mathematicians, anybody.
Right. And you're talking about also what being driven by things like, well, XR, AR, augmented reality, virtual reality.
Right. It complicates things, but we still feel, at least right now, that we feel that WebGL is still the right place to be teaching the kind of level courses that our books on. Maybe things like Web 3D is going to take over. We follow that, but right now I think the Vulkan path is not right for educators. So maybe that and Metal and the others may be the right thing for things that they're going to be doing later in their careers. The whole VR, XR is really taking over. But when you want to get students started, and the other part of it that's always been important to me with short courses is our students are not all going to be high-level game developers. They're not going to be doing this stuff. You have an awful lot of students that come, they want to develop their own little app. They're trying to understand something else. They may be doing some graphics in some other field. And so we still don't see how Vulkan or Metal or one of the others is really going to take care of that.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, because one of the things I find is a lot of the students, they're not going to be coding computer graphics. I mean,
right.
at a deep level, and they may be using some built-in features in whatever libraries they're using that produce the graphics, but they do have to have an intuition as to what is happening, so they don't screw it up, literally.
I put out a thing in that talk, but since nobody saw it, I haven't gotten any feedback. But it's the scene graphs. That was the word I was looking for before. Is the scene graphs are kind of interesting because they don't cover everything, but on the other hand, you can use some pretty high level functionality very, very easily. And so there's a question of whether that's right. But we feel that where we are now, at least for computer science students, computer engineering students, is they get to know enough about the hardware to where they can do things, kind of understand what's going on underneath. The scene graphs for students in a broader fields are maybe, a good, I'm kind of curious to maybe go and teach a course using a scene graph just to, see how, because I've had people come to me and they say, well, I've been doing this and they don't know any graphics at all. And I look at what they've done and it's spectacular what they've been able to do without really understanding what's going on underneath.
Well, actually, you're raising a question I wanted to ask you anyway, which was, and I've had this discussion with other people in our field a while back, and it's like there's two camps of teaching computer graphics. I see. One is you teach algorithms, all the foundational algorithms in the math, etc. And another camp says, no, you should, you don't have to teach them all the algorithms. You let them use tools like OpenGL, and they do everything at a very high level. I mean, personally, I like the middle road, but I'm just wondering.
Well, that's what I think we're doing.
But I think where do you sit? I mean, are you
in the middle road? Definitely the middle road. I mean, I don't know. I know there's people out there who do it. The people I mostly deal with and the students are not taking the algorithm route. That's gone away a long way. And it's funny because my background is more, I would say it's closest to applied math as anything. And so I kind of like that stuff. I like the algorithms. I like teaching algorithms. I mean, but on the other hand, if you want to do something,
do you still teach? Do you still teach one or two algorithms so they can get a sense of it or not?
Well, it depends where. If you talk about line drawing algorithms, it's getting further and further down. Some of the higher level algorithms for doing realistic effects and things like that, we do cover, but you implement them in WebGL or OpenGL or some other API. So that gets in there, but the kind of low level stuff is kind of disappearing. And we move it further back in our classes. But that was my whole thing right at the beginning of the difference between what we were doing and say Foley Van Dam, which started right at the 2D and worked up to 3D. We started by starting at 3D and working down. But one problem is there's so much more that you want to teach students. that the idea of that here's this one course that's the first course it's getting harder and harder.
I know. Yeah. There's so much more that keeps coming out. I mean, sure, a lot of students, when they walk into a computer graphics course, they expect it to cover everything in XR, everything in animation, everything in visualization in one course. I'm like, no, it's not going to happen.
And I don't know what's going to happen in the future. That's why we try to open up the discussion in this virtual talk. And I still think we maybe next year at SIGGRAPH, we might have it. I mean, remember long ago, I can't remember which SIGGRAPH it was. I did a talk about APIs, and it was at a time when OpenGL was about to disappear, and Microsoft was sort of Direct 3D was kind of taking over. But I think I had over 100 people there, and I raised the question: how many of you are going to expect to use this in your course? And they said nobody raised their hand. So that, and that was sort of a resurrection of really OpenGL, and that, at that point, which was almost at the point of disappearing. And then it came back really strong as people saw it could be used on all kinds of different systems. And but I don't know where it's going in the future. I mean, it is. I mean,
it has. You're right. It has been successful, being ported to just about every single platform you can imagine. And it and its siblings, WebGL, et cetera. But I don't know either. I have no crystal ball.
The other problem we have, I don't know if you've had this. I should have probably said that earlier. Is when we went to WebGL, having something that's in JavaScript in a computer science department was really a problem. And the faculty were very anti-JavaScript. The students, of course, didn't care. The students go, oh, it's another language. But, given that we're doing things on the web, JavaScript was the right thing. And that's being less of a problem now, although these various things that'll compile to JavaScript are really going to change. And I don't know what that holds in the future for people teaching. Maybe they will be able to let the students program in whatever language they want, and then use a transpiler to get into WebGL or whatever code.
You're talking about the future. And I'm just wondering, do you have any advice to, educators who are going to be entering the field of computer graphics in the future? Any advice to them?
The biggest problem I have, I don't know if you have that where, you've been, is that teaching is getting less and less important in engineering, computer science, is that when I gave that talk at SIGGRAPH about 10 things I learned teaching, it's really a problem that we tell our assistant professors, oh no, don't spend any time teaching. You've got to establish a research program, which really means you've got to get a lot of funding or you're not going to get tenure. And so we don't mentor our young faculty in that. And the problem now, being retired, I've gotten involved with various things at UNM that have to do with a big fundraising campaign. And part of it, I've been talking to my students from back in the 80s, which has been very, very, very interesting. But it makes you realize that in the end, what matters for us as faculty is our students and what's become of them and their kids, and at least that for me, I don't even hardly remember what I did in all these papers. But I sure remember what we did with our students. And I hope there's a way to convey that to new faculty, that what they teach and their interactions with students is what's going to really matter to them later in their careers and how they feel about what they've done.
True. The thousands and thousands of students you end up teaching, compare that to how many people actually read,
absolutely
use what you wrote in your papers.
Yeah. But the other thing, being here in New Mexico is a whole different story. I mean, because we've never had the kind of resources, and New Mexico is 50th in a number of categories. But we have this great, we just love it here. We won't leave. But it's hugely important in that we're taking families where the kids and they're the first to go to college. It totally changes their life when they can go and get a college degree and see that in something like computer graphics, where they can really go anywhere, they're competitive with anybody, and it just has this enormous effect. And you're right. How many people have read our papers, or how many people read them now?
I mean, what is it? there are all these sites now where they track who's reading your papers, et cetera.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, each week I get maybe a handful of people having read it.
Yeah.
And that's about it. But then, you know, there are just so many students I've taught. If I did the numbers,
yeah,
God, I'm talking maybe like, you know, 39 years of teaching for me, and maybe 150 to 200 new students. We weren't a big school every year.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And if I had an impact on just 1% of them,
yeah,
that's my legacy. Do you consider your students your legacy?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the more time goes on now, the more the stronger that feeling is.
Yeah. Well, Ed, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm hoping I'll be able to see you at the next SIGGRAPH.
The 50th.
As long as we don't go virtual again.
Yeah, I hope not. And the 50th ought to be really nice. And although we sure had a good time at Vancouver.
We did. We packed in the building, and it was fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much, Ed.
Okay. Hey, thank you.